But the center, there's no door. You can walk right through it to the backyard, and that's a dog trot for the airflow. But that's where he was living. But again, we're going to back up again. Well, the people living further out while their homes here being built, one of the things they did for entertainment was parties. They partied all that, especially the Bullocks and the Dunwoodies. The Smiths, they're further away from the rest of the group and kind of on their own. They don't interact too much in this time period with the rest of the founders. And if you'll notice, where's the Smith plantation today in relationship to the other homes in Roswell? It's kind of away. It's not with the group. They were always like that with the founders. And there was some animosity between, especially the Kings and the Smiths. It started over a wedding party and wedding gifts, and that's another story. But the Kings and the Smiths didn't get along, let's put it that way. And that carried over to Miss Catherine, the last descendant of the Kings to live in Barrington Hall, that she remembers as a child. The Smiths were just those people who lived up there, and they really didn't care for them. But this goes all the way back to Roswell King's time, the rift that started between the two families. But anyhow, as they're building here and the parties are going on, Henry Merrill, which was the first boss to bring down to run these mills, because what they found out in the South, there's very little formal education to teach people how to manage a company. You have plenty of people that had money, and I'll invest in your company, but you make my money work for me. And then there's the class of people that I'm going to be working in your industry. But the class that you need in the middle that manages it, rolls their sleeves up, there was very little training on this. So they had to import literally several men from New York that had the training and management down here to run these mills. And so anyhow, as that's going on and the people are partying out here on Holcomb Bridge Road, because that's what it was, Henry Merrill, when he got here from the north, he was used to living in a city. And in the city, when you walk down the street, you tip your hat, you may say hello, but you keep walking. He wasn't used to what they did down here in the South, that he thought was stupid. That's his words at first. But he got used to it after a while. Was every time anybody met anybody, any time of the day, even though you'd already met them that morning, it was always the handshake. How are you doing today? And he just thought that was ridiculous at first. But he got used to it, saying once he got to know the people here, that they truly were sincere and not like, yeah, happy to meet you, and I got my other hand behind my back with a knife in it, ready to stab you in the back. They learned, no, they were very sincere. So he learned to do that custom that was Southern, of actually shaking people's hands, even though you just saw them an hour before and shook their hands. He did this all the time. They had a wedding at the Dunwoody residence, and what they described was they put sheets on the porch that surrounded the house to enclose it, so the house essentially became a big tent. And they put the tables out on the porch, and it was a very lively time, and it just lit up the area, seeing this glow of light from inside this house that's been turned into a big tent, a log cabin. A couple weeks later, they continued that same party for the bride and groom over at the Bullock place. They had a grand time. But they talk about, they stayed too late, the men, with some of the women to get, well, no, it don't work that way, but they stayed late because it's dark and there's no street lights. Well, where the Bullocks were staying was a road that was fairly new, and on the 1832 survey map, which is the first survey formally of this area, of all the homes, the fields, the trails, the road systems, literally shows the road in front of their house is the new road. New road, just like what they described out here, the stumps in the road. And they talk about because they stayed too late, the stumps in the road, it would be too dangerous to take a buggy to get the women home. So they all went on horseback, but they had to go slow because you never knew when you're going to step on a stump. So they said they finally made it from the Bullocks at Martin's Landing to the Dunwoodies near Holcomb Bridge and Old Holcomb Bridge intersection there without an incident, to drop the women off, and then the men came on into town later on. But that was a big deal for them at night they thought it was very foolish what they did because of the stumps in the road. Now the Bullocks, if you think about it, this is the home of the grandparents of the President of the United States, Theodore Roosevelt. And yet that site out there is not even marked in any shape or form. You'd never know it unless I told you and pointed it. And here's the story. Other than that, it's been erased in history. Now, as their homes were built, in fact, the Bullocks was the first home. It wasn't finished, but it was finished enough to move into by Christmas of 1839. So they moved in, leave their farm and to come here to live. But while construction is going on, a lot of the workers, a lot of reports of fights taking place. A lot of them are Irishmen, and I guess like to prove a point every now and then. And then Henry Merrill, being the boss, has to back up, who he is to them. And he got into a few scraps with the workmen. And one of them, they talk about actually tumbling down the hill from where now the brick apartments are on Sloane Street, going down the hill towards the mill, and fisticuffs. But he ruled the day. In other words, what I say he did, and backed it up. Well, Roswell King, before he passed away, built the first mill in cotton mill, which you can go see the ruins of it down at the park here, Vickery Creek now. But what happened was they discovered he built a very poor foundation for a 3-story building, which was starting to crack and settle into the ground. So Henry Merrill had to come in, jack up a 3-story brick building, rip out the foundation and put in a substantial granite foundation and put the building back on it. Now that foundation that was put in by Henry Merrill, you can still see down there today. Roswell King, it's noted on his credit report that is at Harvard University, where you can get a credit report on anybody or any business from 1840 to 1880. So I pulled the credit report for the Roswell Manufacturing Company in its beginnings with Roswell King, and said he never paid for his first factory. He didn't have a good credit rating. Barrington took over when Dad died and ran the town. He was essentially the mayor, the owner of the mill, the head boss, everything you can think of. But he ran it like a very good, shrewd, but polite businessman. Roswell King, not too many people cared for him. And we're not talking about the rip between the Kings and the Smiths. There's no good account of Roswell King. All first-hand accounts are like, no one really cared for the man. He was a good entrepreneur. He was always looking for things to invest in, but it was always about himself and not others. And in fact, Roswell King's wife never came to Roswell. And she was alive. It's not like, well, she maybe already passed away. When Roswell King decided to settle here,
Sorry.
I know it's in there. Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. But when he advertises his home in business in Darien for sale, his wife is still alive. So he's selling the house from underneath her. She is buried today with her sister in Darien, with a formal slab with her sister next door down there. Roswell King, some of his sons stayed down on the coast and working. Some of them came here. So it was a very split family. And you rarely hear about this topic whatsoever. Just places named after Roswell King. You just rubber stamp it without looking into who's Roswell King? Who's this guy, this entrepreneur that created this city? Again, from first-hand accounts, visiting him when he was down in Darien, that the lead driver that would drive the coach, pick up people for the plantation, was evidently one of Roswell King's sons. That evidently he was freely using the slave pen for other reasons. And when Roswell King left to come here, he turned over the overseer position to his son Roswell King Jr., which is credited with doing much more than Dad did. But again, that's another story. But it's just to give you an example of what kind of guy are we even talking about that comes here to start this town. He's an entrepreneur, but he doesn't. Basically, the world revolves around him. But Barrington was a little bit different, his son that eventually took over. He did seem to care about people, but he's still an entrepreneur. So he picked up, some parts of Dad, but not all of Dad, thank goodness. And in fact, by the time of the end of the Civil War, the reason you now have a city here and not a state park is because Barrington King not only had Confederate currency, because he was dealing with the Confederate government on his goods that he was making here, but he also had gold. And he had a lot of cotton that could be turned into U.S. currency if needed, and that's what he did to rebuild this factory here after the war. And it showed a profit during Reconstruction when a lot of businesses weren't at Sweetwater, which was another cotton mill, and the people from there were arrested for treason during the Civil War II and lumped in with the Roswell people, sent to prison. After the war, they had everything invested in Confederate currency, so after the war, management sued, upper management sued lower management for allowing the federal troops to burn the mill, which is ridiculous in wartime, like they're going to stop it. But no one had any money except Confederate currency, which now is worthless. So that's why they could not rebuild that factory, but they could here. So that's why you have a state park to go visit the ruins at Sweetwater, and here you have the city of Roswell because of entrepreneurship.